Manager for the American Redress Coalition of California. We are a coalition partner of CJEC, the Coalition for Just and Equitable California. I have my teammates, thank you, my teammates and colleagues with me here. We have Shannon Kim.
Woo. Yay!
Romaine Frenemy.
Woohoo!
Carol Tolliver.
Yeah.
We have some of our volunteers out in the audience as well. We have Mo over here.
Yay!
We have, everyone knows, Miss Cindy over in the back as well. And shout out to ETMB as well for coming out. One of our partners as well. All right, so we have a great agenda for today, so we're getting ready to get started. I'll turn it over to Darlene, and she's going to discuss the history of Memorial Day.
Thank you everyone for coming. This is just amazing to see everyone here today. Can you hear me? I'm not used to holding a microphone, but I'm going to work on it. So, I would like to start off to say that on May 1st, 1865, the former black slaves started Memorial Day in America. This occurred at the Charleston racetrack in Charleston, South Carolina, after the American Civil War. It was to honor about 257 dead Union soldiers who had been buried in a mass grave in a Confederate prison camp. They dug up the bodies and worked for 2 weeks to give them a proper burial. They did this because they know that they were fighting for their freedom. Together with teachers, missionaries, black residents of Charleston, they organized a May Day ceremony that year, which was covered by the New York Tribune and other national newspapers. The free and clear.
Sorry, we family here, so.
Yeah,
It's all good.
The free and cleaned up landscape at the burial ground and built an enclosure with an ark that was labeled Martyrs of the Racetrack. Nearly 10,000 people, mostly freemen, gathered on May 1st to commemorate the war dead. There were about 3,000 black school children who were newly enrolled in the freemen schools, Mutual Aid Society, Union troops, black ministers, as well as white Northern ministers. Most brought flowers to place on the burial field. Years later, the celebration would become known as the First Decoration Day. David W. Blight of the New York Tribune described this day as the first Memorial Day. What we witnessed was black Americans recently freed from U.S. chattel slavery announcing to the world with their flowers that they carried in their hands, those same hands that were programmed to use the pushing system that required them to separate mind, body, and soul in order to meet their daily quota of picking cotton. They used their feet to march around the race course. In celebration, those same feet that were marched towards the Deep South during the domestic trade in slavery. And with the same voice that once cried out in pain and anguish when a loved one was sold off, they gave the world their songs to let them know that the Civil War was for them, that they were fighting for their freedom. Today, the site is known as Hampton Park. Now, I would like to introduce our esteemed guest speaker, Sergeant Major Jesse Grant, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Sergeant Major Jesse Grant, a native of Columbia, South Carolina, completed his recruit training as a private class, first class, the 2nd Training Platoon, 136 Marine Corps Recruit Depot in Paris Island, South Carolina, on April 1951. Sergeant Major Grant was inspired to enlist in the Marine Corps due to his great uncle Frederick C. Grant being the first commissioned African-American officer in the Marine Corps during World War II. Sergeant Grant served with the Montford Point Marines and was promoted to rank of captain before leaving the Marine Corps. 114 years after the first Memorial Day, May 1st, 1979, he was promoted to Sergeant Major. His military career spans over 30 years, and he retired in 1981. It gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce Sergeant Major Jesse Grant as we honor our black military personnel past and present.
Thank you, everyone. Being a Marine, I don't know if I need a mic. Did everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Loud and clear? Yes, sir. All right. I'll probably use the mic once in a while. Say good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is both an honor and a privilege and a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon. Before I get started, I'd like to make a few remarks. First thing I'd like to mention is alongside every successful man is a successful woman. Amen. And I am not an exception. With me today is Sabrina Stevens, who is sitting over on the right, who is my commandant, along with other things. I never go anywhere to do any speeches without her. So you want to make sure I say the right thing and do the right thing. The other thing I'd like to mention is I believe in the three B's of speech. Be accurate, be quick, and be seated. Memorial Day is not for car sales. It is not for patio furniture sales. It's not for barbecues. We celebrate not just the sacrifices, but what we gain from those sacrifices. Today, I will talk briefly about three specific groups. That is the Buffalo Soldiers, Tuskegee Airmen, and the Moffett Point Marines. Now, the reason I selected these specific groups because they were mainly African Americans. Somewhere along the line, not just the black communities, but throughout history, the three people that I'm going to talk about seem to have been forgotten. This is a time that we need to remember they were the ones that paved the way for where we are today. One of the people I'll be talking about is Mark Matthews, the Buffalo Soldiers, Colonel James Warren, Tuskegee Airmen, and Captain Frederick Branch. As they mentioned before, that is actually my uncle. Some of the current generation, especially the younger generation, is not always aware of what it was to be black in the armed forces. Black people have fought in every United States war, from the Revolutionary War through the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. 90 African Americans, keep this in mind, only 90 African Americans have been awarded the Medal of Honor. Now, I find that to be very disturbing. Over the course of the year, and this is current information. So from the beginning of the wars up to now, there's only been 90. It's hard to believe, but it's down in history. On Memorial Day, let us remember to memorialize these three groups. Continue to tell the stories. their contribution they made for the freedom of our country. The first person I'm going to talk a little bit about, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be brief. I'm not going to go into details. Each one of these groups that I talk about, you can Google them and get the full history. The first one is the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers were African American soldiers during or right after the Civil War. In 1866, the Black Cavalry and Infantry Regiments were created. After Congress passed the Army Organization Act, the Buffalo Soldiers' main tasks were to help control the native Indians in the plains, that's in Texas and some of the southern states or Middle Eastern states. Their duties were to protect stagecoaches, wagon trains, railroad workers that was on the Western Front. No one knows exactly how they got the name Buffalo Soldiers. There's been several theories. One of them was the fact that the Indians, they named them the Buffalo Soldiers because of their curly dark hair, which resembled the fur of a buffalo. The other assumption was because the Indians feared the Buffalo Soldiers because they fought fiercely and aggressively. So it reminded them of the buffalo, which was also fierce and aggressive. So those are the two theories that they came by that name of Buffalo Soldiers. Nevertheless, or whatever the reason was, African American regiments was formed in 1866, and that included the 25th and the 26th Infantry, which was consolidated from the earlier regiments. In 1880, the 9th and 10th Cavalry was minimized because the resistance had calmed down somewhat in Texas. The 25th Infantry of the Buffalo Soldiers were sent to the place that we now know as Oklahoma. The other part of the Buffalo Soldiers were sent to Montana. They had Indian uprising in those areas, and they sent them to curtail or combat the uprising. But ironically, the Buffalo Soldiers that went to Oklahoma, they went to Oklahoma, ironically, to keep the white settlers from settling on Indian land. So they were protecting the Indians' land and their heritage. Now I'm going to talk just a few minutes about Mark Matthews. Mark Matthews, the nation's oldest living Buffalo Soldier. He died in 2005 at the age of 111. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman issued an executive order eliminating racial segregation, and it ended during the 1950s. Now, as I mentioned before, there is much more history to the Buffalo Soldiers, what they did, and how they performed. They were really fierce fighters. That's from my information. Of course, I wasn't back there during that time, but that's what I was told. I'm not quite that old yet. The next person that we want to memorialize, or the next group, is the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm going to ask a question, not for an answer, but just to raise your hand. How many people know who and what the Tuskegee Airmen are all about? Okay, all right. So you can correct me when I make a mistake. That's why I asked that question. In January 1941, the War Department formed the all-black 99th Pursuit Squadron of the U.S. Army Air Corps, which later became the Air Force. They were trained in Tuskegee, Alabama, using single-engine aircraft. Prior to that, the NAACP and the black press lobbied hard to have the black servicemen to become pilots. What happened there was the president of the United States at that time was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He compromised. He said, we will create an all-black Air Force squadron. However, they will have to train separately. They did not integrate to train with the white pilots. The NAACP, they were up in arms about that, but after thinking about it, they thought it was a good way to begin the integration of the Air Force. During their tenure, 992 pilots graduated from Tuskegee Airfield, and they flew 1,578 missions and 15,533 sorties, destroyed 261 enemy aircraft, and won more than 850 medals. Again, you can complete this by Googling Tuskegee Airmen. It'll give you a little more of each and every one. However, I would like to talk a little bit about Colonel Warren. If you ever have the opportunity to visit Travis Air Force Base, in their museum, there is a special section for Colonel Warren. He is a native of Solano County. Now here's just a little bit about his accomplishments. Lieutenant Colonel James Warren began his military career in 1943 as one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. During his distinguished 35 years in the military, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross, with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Air Force Medal with 11 oak leaf clusters, and various other citations. He is the author of the book, Freeman Field Mutiny. He's also featured in the movie Red Tails. Colonel Warren passed away a few years ago. In his honor, there's a section of Interstate 80 that runs through Vacaville that has been named in his honor. So, for the Tuskegee Airmen, they came a long way. Now we have, and I can't even count them, how many black fighter pilots, C-117 pilots, etc. Now, as far as the organization back during the training at Tuskegee, the first commander of that squadron was General, I get his name right, you guys are throwing stones at me if I don't get his name right. He was, I had to write it down because I could never remember it, although, and that's the word I had to get from my assistant. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. I probably have too many things in my head. He was also the first colonel in the Air Force back in the Tuskegee Airmen. Now we want to talk a little bit about the Montford Point Marines, my favorite subject. The Marine Corps officially became a part of the armed forces in 1775. It was 160 years. 160 years before African Americans was allowed to join the Marine Corps. 160 years. The names of the people that I want to mention and that I think should be memorialized or at least thought about. The first one was a lady by the name of Opha Mae Johnson. She was the first female to join the Marine Corps, and that was in 1918. John Martin was the first enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1776. That's 1 year after the Marine Corps was formed. He was a slave, and he joined the Marine Corps without his master's permission. Back then, if you were a slave, you had to get permissions to do anything. And he stole off and joined the Marine Corps. Howard Perry enlisted the Marine Corps in 1942, right after the President of the United States had signed a declaration or the directive to integrate all branches of the service. Annie Grimes joined the Marine Corps in 1950. She became the first black female officer. She retired in 1980 after serving 20 years in the Marine Corps. Sergeant Major Gilbert Johnson joined the Marine Corps in 1943. He was one of the first black drill instructors. He retired as a sergeant major. Now, he was the second sergeant major ever in the Marine Corps. I don't know if it showed a little bit of my history, but I was the third sergeant major in the United States Marine Corps, and I didn't get promoted to that rank until 1977. So it was a long road from 1951 to 1977.
Wow.
Sergeant Major Johnson, in 1974, the Montfort Point camp was rededicated Camp Johnson in his honor. That's in North Carolina. That is outstanding to have a complete training facility named after an African American. The next person, you already said a little bit about him, was Frederick Captain. I use this word all the time, Captain Uncle Frederick Branch. He joined the Marine Corps in 1942. Now, he was the first commissioned officer in the Marine Corps. Now, the question may be, well, how could that be when there was so much of segregation going on? Uncle Fred, he was fortunate enough to obtain a college degree. By having a college degree, when he joined the Marine Corps, he requested to go to the Officers Candidate School. And he came out as a second lieutenant. He was in Korea during the time that I was in Korea. Of course, he was much older than I was, but he was almost at the point of retiring. He retired in 1988. He retired as a captain. In his honor, a building was named after Captain Branch in 1995 in Quantico, Virginia. That's another big accomplishment for the blacks in the military. He was very humble and soft-spoken. Even at the dedication, he didn't have much to say. He just kind of said, he didn't say, well, I deserve it. You know, he didn't boast about it. He just accepted it, and he passed away about 7 years ago in Philadelphia. Frank Peterson was the first black pilot in the Marine Corps in 1952. In 1952, Frank Peterson was in some of the same battles, flying cover that I was in Pork Chop Hill. I didn't know him personally until after we came back to the States. And it was my honor to serve under his command in 29 Palms, California, for a short period of time. And later, I served under his command again in Yuma, Arizona. Now, Frank Peterson, he spent 33 years in the Marine Corps, and I would say 33 years in the Marine Corps plus another 6 years in the Navy, which gave him a total of 38 years. He was promoted to Brigadier General, the first African American to be promoted with a star as a general in the Marine Corps history. General Peterson retired in 1988. He retired as a 3-star general. It was really sad to see because he had been selected unofficially to be promoted as a 4-star general, which would have been the commandant of the Marine Corps. But he had to retire because of his health, and it was kind of sad to see. He passed away 5-6 years ago. They nicknamed him the Gray Eagle because of his flights, because of his flying career. Currently, in the Marine Corps, there are 88 generals overall. There's only 6 black generals. I don't call that equality. Now, when I say currently, there has been a few that retired and no longer. These are active generals in the Marine Corps at this time. Now, we were, I won't say fortunate, but we have achieved another milestone. We now have a female 2-star general in the Marine Corps by the name of Leona Matlock. She was promoted in 2022. The other milestone that we have is Michael Langley, promoted to 4-star general, the first 4-star general in the Marine Corps. Word have it that he will become the commandant of the Marine Corps. Can't get any better than that. Hopefully, this will happen. He is now in command of the forces in Europe, and from the information that I got, he's scheduled to return to Washington, D.C. and become the assistant commandant, which means that when the commandant retires, that he should be able to step into that rank. We've come a long way in all branches of the service, but we still have room for improvement. I go out to Travis occasionally. I visit bases, Marine Corps bases. I'm looking for people of color in commands. I still don't see as many as I would like to see. But the time will come. We gotta have patience. That's a little bit about the people that I believe that should be memorialized on this Memorial Day. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, which was not on the screen. And I would probably be a little remiss if I didn't mention some of these things. It's just about 3, maybe 4 points that I want to mention that I was involved in or exposed to. As it was mentioned, I was born in Columbia, South Carolina, 1933. That was during or right after the Great Depression. Basic training. I was in a platoon of 40, and there were 3 blacks in that platoon. Now at this time, they had been integrated. Needless to say, we as Black Marines was encountered with physical and mental, I don't want to say, I'll say events, put it that way. Things that I don't normally talk about. But I was determined, basically because of my uncle, I was determined that I would bend, but not break. I would never be DOR, that is drop on request. That wasn't for me. The other couple of things that I just want to mention, from basic training I went to Camp June, and at this time they unbased everything and everybody was integrated, of course. However, the town of Jacksonville, North Carolina, segregation was alive and well. We could not go to restaurants when we went into town. We could not go to places of entertainment when we went into town. In the public transportation areas, there were still signs that read black and color. It took me many, many years, and I still don't understand what they meant by color. That were their terms. It got to the point that the commanding general from Camp Lejeune went in to talk to the mayor of the city and informed him that Jacksonville, North Carolina would be off limits to all Marines. At that time, they changed and they started accepting to go. And I was ready to leave then, so I didn't benefit. Another ironic thing that happened to me was when we left North Carolina, heading to Camp Pendleton on our way to Korea, we were allowed to go home for 10 days, leave to visit the family. During that time, hitchhiking was the thing. And there was a town by the name of Tryon, North Carolina, and it still exists. Go going through that town, 3 white men in a car, and I was in full uniform, stopped and asked me, where are you going? And I told them, I'm going to South Carolina. Okay, we'll give you a ride. Needless to say that after a few minutes, they turned off the main road. And if I ever prayed, I prayed then. Because I knew that something wasn't right. I was actually abducted by the KKK.
Oh my gosh.
Once we were out in the area where they was having their rally meeting or whatever they had, I could hear them talking in low voices. And after about 30 minutes, the longest 30 minutes in my life, they came back. I was still in the car. They came back and they drove away. They drove me back to the main road. And instead of just opening the door, they shoved me out and said, "You're free to go." Now, nobody can tell me, even today, that somebody in that organization was a member of the armed forces or knew the consequences of what would happen if anything had happened to a military person. And I will say this, I never hitchhiked again in my life. All right, I just wanted to bring those couple of things to mind. The other astonishing thing, when I got in Korea, I was in a platoon which was broken into a squad, and we were on our way up to Pork Chop Hill. The squad leader made a broad statement. He said, "I am not going into battle with a black person." He didn't have the decency to call me a Marine. However, that wasn't the case. The CO had the last words. But it came to my mind that I'm fighting 2 wars. I got a fear for my life against the enemy, and now I have to wonder, or I should turn my back on this particular person. Well, 2 days after we got on the front lines in Pork Chop Hill, we were hit by a mortar fire. And 3 of us was seriously wounded. One of the members was able to go out into a safe zone. The platoon leader was one of the people that actually got severely wounded. I got hit with shrapnel. In spite of that, I was able to carry this particular Marine to a safe landing zone. Now, we were trained, never leave anyone behind. To make a long story short, after we recovered in a naval hospital in Yokosuka, we ended up going back to my unit, and we came back to the States. This particular individual went to another unit, and I went to another unit. About 2 years later, I got a letter from him, and I guess he was told, I got a letter from him that's saying thank you for, saving my life. And he said, I'm planning on getting married, and I just want to know, would you be my best man? I thought about it, but then, being the person that I am, I agreed, and I went and he got married, and he went his separate ways, and I heard from him almost every year until he passed away about 10 years ago. So, you know, I could talk for hours about my experiences, but I got to stick to my first thing to say, be brief. I'm going to be brief. I'm going to say this, and no offense to anybody, but they always told me never give a microphone to a lawyer, a politician, and a Baptist minister. That's a little side joke, and I always tell that joke. I'm at the point now that I'm going to close my chat. Feel free to ask me any questions after I'm finished. In closing, freedom and recognition of individual rights are what our revolution was all about. They were ideas that inspired our fight for independence. Ideas that we have been striving to live ever since. Yet, it took many years before these ideas became reality, not just for the country, but especially for Black Americans. On this Memorial Day, and all the years to come, let us remember to always support our troops and veterans, regardless of our political differences. Memorial Day is a day to remember those that made the ultimate sacrifice. Memorial Day, as I mentioned earlier, is not a celebration. This is a memorial. So whatever you plan to do on tomorrow, which is actually Memorial Day, take a little time to remember those that have gone on before us. If you don't have any relatives, or if you don't know anybody personally, it does not matter. Somebody are missing a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter. So let's don't say, well, it don't apply to me because I never had anybody in the military. Remember to spend some time. Memorial Day, as I always said, should not be just the one day. We should remember every day the person or the people that have gone on before us. Let us continue to tell the story to all generations. Not just let it be another chapter in our history, but that it is a living story of service, valor, sacrifices made by our troops. And I just want to say thank you for allowing me to babble on for a little bit, and hopefully that it enlightened some of the people that may not have known the history. With that, may God bless our veterans, our troops in uniform, and our families and friends. And may God bless us all and our great and beloved nation, the United States of America. Thank you. just want to say one thing that I didn't mention before. Two of my guests here today are Pastor Moore and his wife, Lisa. They have been very supportive in whatever I do when it comes to, you know, being who I am. So I just wanted to introduce them in case you don't know them. And by the way, he is the pastor of the church right here in Richmond. Thank you.